Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to day 72 of Humanity Rising. Every day since the 22nd of May, Ubiquity University and upwards of 350 partners from all over the world have created a 2-hour open space between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time. So people everywhere can quite literally come together and share their experiences as we all navigate through this extraordinary pandemic. We're in an unprecedented moment in human history. We're all under some form of lockdown. We're all engaging in social distancing. We're observing that the pandemic is not going away. And in countries like the United States in particular, and Brazil, now increasingly in Africa and Asia, the rates of the COVID virus are increasing. So we're in a crisis that has gone on for nearly 6 months and shows no intent to stop. And all of us are concerned. The United States posted the worst economic quarter in its entire history. Similarly, in the European Union this week, those statistics are now being reported and replicated around the world. So this little virus stopped our world, stopped us in our tracks. And things that we thought were impossible became possible. And things that we thought were always going to happen, like flying all over the place, became impossible. Extraordinarily, everybody is now in the same conversation. No matter where we are in the world, everybody's going through the same experience. Everybody's now in the same conversation. So the pandemic offers us an literally unprecedented, extraordinary opportunity to think through what kind of world we want beyond the pandemic. Scientists are telling us that all the major indicators, at the center of which is runaway climate change, are getting worse, not better. It's an extraordinary paradox if you think about it. And I'm using the term extraordinary because it is extraordinary. There are millions of us, tens, hundreds of millions of people around the world that are working day in and day out to make the world more sustainable and abundant and healthy and resilient and in alignment with natural systems. And yet the world is still spinning out of control. And scientists are telling us we're running out of time. How do we square that between the extraordinary effort and a situation that's getting worse and worse by the day? So that scientists are now predicting an escalation beyond the pandemic of extreme weather events and more epidemics. The central question around which Humanity Rising has been convened is the question of leadership. How do those of us in the progressive community, given what's at stake, lead in such a way that we can make an observable difference in the way the world shapes itself moving into the future? Because up to the present time, we haven't been able to do that. This irony, this paradox, has shaped many of the panels of Humanity Rising as we've been grappling with strategic effectiveness. In April, the city of Amsterdam demonstrated real leadership and announced that in the middle of the pandemic, it was going to embrace donut economics, putting human well-being at the center of the purpose of Amsterdam city governance as they move beyond the pandemic, and place human well-being within the context of ecological systems and constraints. That leadership sent an electric shock around the world, and dozens of cities announced that they were going to follow suit. The most important of which has been Copenhagen. So there are now two major world cities that are embracing human well-being at the center of what they're going to create beyond the pandemic. That was leadership at scale, in a way that's making a difference in the outcome of our process through this pandemic. Today, we want to take up the question of leadership again. And so I'm delighted to be able to introduce a good friend and colleague, Karen Buckley, who my family and her family have known each other for many, many years. Our children were friends with each other all the way through school. Karen is a consultant internationally to businesses and organizations. She speaks around the world. She engages in coaching around personal transformation. And she's been preoccupied with the question of leadership, particularly around women's leadership for many, many years. So this is the first of several panels on this question that she'll be convening. So Karen, I want to thank you for rising to this occasion and convening this and other panels on the crucial question of how the people with the white hats lead at this critical moment in human history.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Excuse me, I guess I haven't done enough speaking yet this morning. Good morning from California, San Francisco Bay Area. I know for some of you it's evening, for some it's afternoon, and for some of you, you're watching us on the recording. I'm glad that you've joined us. I want to really honor Jim and the whole Humanity Rising team. The kind of leadership that you've shown in convening conversations, identifying what's working, inviting cross-discipline collaboration, is creating a global network of mentors and change makers. It's remarkable to see, and very exciting, living examples of conscious leadership. And as you are, I'm asking what will slow our plunge into the disasters that face us of climate, health, and social issues. Urban legend has it that 70% of all change efforts fail. Some research shows statistics as high as 96% of organizations are undergoing transformative change efforts, while only 47% expect to realize sustainable value from those efforts. We're in a situation where we don't necessarily know how to clean up the mess we've made. And yet we have no choice but to continue to take action, look for meaningful action, and find the capacity inside ourselves and to support each other to lead. In my experience and decades of working with leaders, I have found that the fastest lever for change is to identify and amplify what's working. Some of you may know appreciative inquiry. It's a well-documented approach to helping individuals and systems move from deficit-based paradigm to a strength-based paradigm. What I know to be true is that in any organizational change with any leader that I work with global issues, with county issues, city issues, what we are dealing with is such a complexity that if we can identify what's working, and I don't mean in a Pollyannish way, I mean substantially identify what's working and begin to build from that and replicate that and work with that and spread it and come up with support systems that help it to happen, that we end up with change that occurs in a faster way. Today, we're going to amplify what's working as we explore the best of 4 conscious leaders who are designing effective collaboration between systems and organizations. Conscious leaders recognize that we are all part of a living system that's changed by our choices and our commitments. Conscious leaders understand that by working together, we can change the design of the past on behalf of a new future, one that sustains a vital earth and all life. In order to do that, conscious leaders work within the invisible side of leadership so that their being is connected with their doing. You can hear a lot today about mindfulness and developing leadership presence and authentic presence. Well, I first wrote about the invisible side of leadership in 1986 and published in the book Transforming Leadership. Today's session will frame our discussion. I want to frame our discussion around 3 important aspects of the invisible side of leadership: mindsets, practices, and commitment. We'll take 5 steps together today on this panel. The first is I'll provide some context, and then the speakers will give a very brief introduction of themselves. I'll then explore a little bit more of the framing for this conversation around mindsets, that established set of attitudes and beliefs, and how our mindsets shape how we organize and make sense of the world. The speakers will then have an opportunity to each speak about the kinds of mindsets that they see that are effective in supporting collaboration and significant change. We'll then discuss the kinds of practices that we use to develop and amplify our ability to come from love and wisdom. And that will be a discussion portion where we'll really open it up, the 5 of us, and have a conversation about some of what we've been learning and some of what we see would be important to amplify and build from. When we end the session today, we'll end with commitment, a promise that we each make to ourselves and to you, and we'll ask you to do the same, to consider what is your commitment? How will you dedicate yourself to step out of theories and apply ideas, beliefs, methods in meaningful action? We all have a choice together to repeat the past or to create a new future. I have a story that I first heard from Sister Joan Chittister that I'd like to share with you this morning, called The Nun and the Samurai. The samurai was covering the hills looking for the answer to his question about what is heaven and what is hell. He came upon a temple where there was an old Buddhist nun. She sat in meditation and prayer. He came up to her and he said, "Would you please tell me what is the way to heaven?" And she said, "You would never understand." He stood back, he looked shocked. "What?" he said. She said, "It is far too difficult for someone like you to understand." "What?" He got mad, he got angry. He began to really get hot under the collar. And finally she looked at him and she said, "You're too small of a person to begin to understand the way into heaven." Well, he took a step back. He pulled his sword out of his scabbard and he swung it around, stopped within an inch of her neck. And she looked up at him and she said, "That, sir, is the way to hell." Thunderstruck by the insight, he stepped back, laid his sword before her, and bowed from the waist all the way down to the bowing from the waist. She looked up at him again, and she said, "That, sir, is the way to heaven." We all have that choice now to repeat the past or to create a new future. Scientists have shown us that we have 7 years to create a new future. Front page headline in Time magazine this month caught my eye. It's one last chance, the defining year for the planet. Between the pandemic, the accelerating climate change, and social justice issues, we know we can't go back to an old normal. The new normal is asking for new skills, new mindsets that change how we behave, who we are, and how we operate in the world. The kind of mindsets that change the results we can get as leaders. We know that we don't know how to solve the mess we're in, and yet leaders around the globe are taking action even as they are coming to know, learning to listen for and respond into an emergent future. There's a lot of good leadership that's responding at local, national, international levels to resolve homelessness, build inclusive cultures in law enforcement, accelerate social investing, become B Corps, and develop LEED certified engineering projects. We've seen many warriors leading us into a new future here in Humanity Rising. The University of Singapore MBA students who were turning their restaurants into food delivery for underserved populations. Tia Kansara, who works with Replenish the Earth with policymakers and businesses. Edward Mueller just last week applying the regenerative principles in Costa Rica. But what will make the difference? We are ill-equipped working in this dynamic field of interconnected change and loss on so many levels. And the challenge we face is to sustain ourselves, to stay centered and engaged as leaders during this time of great uncertainty, to adapt and create a new existence in this emergent and altered reality. To do so, we are beginning to value silence. I invite you to join me in just a minute of silence, to anchor, connect, and listen. So if you would take a minute, please, in your own place where you are, take a breath, anchor yourself, centering in your own coherence. Perhaps one more deeper breath. And then feel the connection of all of us here together and all those who will be watching the recording. The field of shared coherence that we have and shared commitment. And then listen together. Let's listen. Let's open ourselves into a mode of discovery. Listening for what we don't yet know, but what we can come to know. And then coming on back, I'll give the speakers now a chance to introduce themselves. The speakers today are effective leaders who are designing change across systems, connecting different voices, cultures, perspectives, crafting and guiding processes for change. So I'd like to ask them each to introduce themselves, saying their name, where they live today, or where they're from, and a sentence or two that describes the essence of being a leader. Prashani, would you start us out?
Certainly. Thank you so much, Karen. My name is Prashani Satyapal. I am based in Johannesburg. And when I'm asked about essence of leadership now, I think about a conscious lived learning. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kristen.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Christine Engvig, and I am from Norway. I'm calling today out of Switzerland, and I'm connecting people and ideas and to do things together in the world, particularly working with women. And leadership for me is really in this moment to give inspiration and hope. And that also means that we are rooted to our values and very much linked to the decision making and how we dare to make decisions based on our values and actions and being in that inspiring and hopeful space. Thank you.
And Ada.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm in London, and the essence of my leadership, I suppose it's the ability to recognize patterns that then means that I'm able to make conscious decisions about how to be in service of things that are bigger than myself, whether that be communities or the planet. But yes, it's about being able to recognize patterns and make choices, make conscious decisions about being in service. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Alyssa.
Thank you, Karen. Such a pleasure to be here. I am joining from Singapore. I look after the Asia Pacific business for the Center for Creative Leadership. For me, leadership is around burning bright, so we can help other people burn bright and not burn out. We need enlightened leaders who will burn bright at all levels in many organizations, across generations, across ages, and also navigating paradox. It's a very confusing time for leadership, and we need to effectively navigate paradox as leaders.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask you all to turn your cameras back off for the moment, and I'll give a bit of context around mindsets and change, and then each of the speakers will be back to join us very soon. So decades of experience have shown me that a leader is someone who is willing and able to act on what matters most. It's a fairly simple formula. A leader is somebody who's willing and able to act on what matters most to them. What matters most, what will make the difference. And through their actions, something comes into being that wasn't there before. A conscious leader is someone who chooses to be awake, aware, sensitive, and wise. That doesn't mean they don't lose consciousness. That doesn't mean they're not unconscious at times, but they make the choice to lead employing multiple intelligences, the intellect, the emotional, sensory, and spiritual. They blend polarities, intuition and rational, inspiring, visionary, and practical implementer. They both give hope, and they are not afraid to say the truth of what's not working and what's happening. And they are able to sit with the discomfort of the paradoxes, as Alyssa mentioned. I've explored conscious leadership in this lifetime of learning, active research, and long-term retainer contracts with consulting with key leaders in corporations, nonprofits, spiritual communities, city, county, state, and federal government in the United States and abroad. What I have discovered is that conscious leaders are continually discovering and updating their mindset that drives their behavior, how they act, and the choices they make. Our mindsets shape the pattern of our thinking. They create a worldview out of which we take certain actions, we see certain things, and we don't see other things. They just don't even come onto our radar. And some of our mindsets serve us and some of them don't. Most of these mindsets were developed, or many of our mindsets were developed when we were young. And they made total logical sense at that time. They were conclusions that we came to, that we locked in place and have reinforced throughout our life with our selective vision and with the kind of actions that we take. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. When we can discover and update those mindsets, we can discover and update the kinds of ways we behave and the results we can achieve. Our behavior we can assess our mindset by looking at our results and the results of our team. We can see mindsets at work globally at this point, whether COVID-19 has spread or is contained in different countries. And what's so interesting is that a mindset insists on its point of view despite evidence to the contrary, making it hard to figure out our way through this mess. And we can certainly see that in some of the countries today, including America. So some mindsets, I find, repeat the past. And those mindsets divide, disconnect, dominate. They prioritize self-protection over connection. They lead to fragmentation. And other mindsets can create a new future. Creating a new future requires different kinds of mindsets that connect, cross divides, uplift others, and build trust. These mindsets expand our view to see more of the whole picture, even the ones we don't want to see, the pieces that fit together even as they change. In these kinds of mindsets, we consciously step up to lead, responsive to the emergent future, while anchored in the here and now, engaged in meaningful action. So the good news is that we can change our mindsets. Those mindsets that we locked in when we were children can be transformed. We can recognize that we created them, we reached that conclusion, and by developing that kind of relationship, conscious relationship with those mindsets that drive us, we can begin to transform our relationship and be in relationship with the world as it is today, and begin to author mindsets that serve us and serve the world and the emergent future that we want to see and that we're paying attention to and listening to and creating from. So conscious leaders transform limiting mindsets, and they actively strengthen mindsets that support effective action and result in the kinds of changes that they want to see. There's two mindsets I'd like to explore briefly today, very briefly. One is the mindset around change, and the second is a mindset around collaboration. So simply looking at the mindset around change, are we resisting change? Do we think change is bad? Do we think change is trouble? Is that the mindset we operate in? Or are we engaging in change, leaning into the change, embracing the change? Do we think change is exciting? Do we think change is invigorating? Do we think change is our mindset that change is, do we trust change? And at this point, we're all being stirred up. And what I've discovered is that embracing rather than turning away from what disturbs us is a skill. It's a muscle that we can build. One of my recent blogs is on embracing disturbance, the best way to look without flinching. It's not always easy to look at what's going on out there. It's not easy to try and read different people's perspectives, listen to different channels on the media, reach out to people who have different points of view and actually listen. There's 5 questions that I introduce in that blog that help us to figure out how to embrace disturbance. The first is to notice. Simply notice when you feel uncomfortable or disturbed today or this week. By noticing what makes you uncomfortable or disturbed, rather than pushing it away, rather than boxing it up and telling it it's wrong, any of those kinds of things that we do to avoid disturbance. By embracing it, we can first notice what it is that makes us uncomfortable, name it. The second thing to do, the second question to ask yourself is, where do you sense disturbance in your body? What feels uncomfortable? Where are you irritated? Where do you feel reactive, tempted to lash out or back away? If you can identify that sense in the body, that allows you to move to the third question, which is to explore. What have I made this disturbance mean? What is the story I'm telling myself in relationship to this disturbance, this person or this event? What belief or way of life is being challenged? What was I assuming was going to happen that didn't happen? And the fourth question is to choose, will I genuinely engage with a change? Will I reconsider my assumptions and beliefs? Will I try and see this differently, holding the paradox of what I thought was going to happen and what's actually happening? How can I hold both of those long enough that I can begin to see what the true relationship might be. And the fifth question is around action. Will I take action? Will I take different action based on embracing that discomfort? Now, change happens at 3 levels, and a different mindset, different set of assumptions and pattern of thinking is needed for each level. The minor level of change, which is superficial rearrangement of parts and pieces, isn't going to do it. And we know that. We've done a lot of that, and there's a lot of that going on. It repeats the past. A major change is a more significant change, and we see major changes happening around the world. We've put major changes in motion through climate degradation, systemic racism, class and economic divisions. Many global solutions to change are on this level, and they're doing very good work of solving hunger, poverty, carbon emissions. The third level of change is the transformative level of change. There aren't many of those. They're not easy. They take something. Those of you that have gone through a transformative change personally probably know the experience. It's a little bit like when we were a child and we were learning to swim. And I can remember standing in the water and looking at that water, and they kept telling me the water was going to hold me up. And I kept saying, no, I promise it's not. Look at it. Look, it's just water. And then at some point I learned how to swim. And in that first couple moments when I began to actually float and began to move myself through the water, I recognized a different relationship. My relationship changed with water in that moment. It was a complete shift and transformation in the way that I viewed water and the way I interacted with water and my relationship with the world. My worldview shifted. Transformation is something that we can intend, and we need to put a lot of things, action behind it. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said in a video message last April, we can turn the crisis of this pandemic into an opportunity to rebuild our economies differently. And on May 27th, she pledged more than $800 billion to the initiative, promising to transform the way Europeans live. She is taking a stand for a transformation. Now, it's still working its way through the politics, but it starts with a stand, and that's what good leaders do. Good leaders take a stand for the kind of change that they want to see happen. And change happens in 3 dimensions. So the little bit that I've been able to research and look at the kinds of plans that she's putting in place, I can see that she recognizes that change happens in 3 different dimensions. Change happens on the level of structures, behaviors, and consciousness, and all 3 work together. We're tempted often to try and change our consciousness as the sole way in which we're going to create change in the world or in our organization. But unless we also work on changing behavior patterns, those habitual ways we behave, and unless we change the structures in our organization, the systems, the agreements, the way in which we interact and do things, the change isn't actually going to happen. So we're back to the question of how can we begin to thrive within a thriving world? And cities around the world are answering this question by changing the way they're structured, their systems, their transportation, their healthcare delivery. They're asking for behavior changes and educating to change consciousness. Jim mentioned Amsterdam in his opening remarks. Copenhagen, Costa Rica, and many more cities and countries are actually working with Kate Rayworth's research and model on donut economics. Kate was on Humanity Rising last week. Excellent presentation. So that's the first mindset to take a look at, is what is your mindset around change? And what would be a mindset that you could strengthen that would support and amplify your capacity to lead through change? The second mindset I want to look at is a mindset around collaboration. Because collaborating across and between systems is a marvelous ideal, and it is not always easy to do. I have facilitated hundreds of meetings where good-hearted people are trying as hard as they can to collaborate and to work together. And it takes a lot. So given that our mindsets drive us to behave in certain ways which create the results we experience, I have seen that there are two fundamental mindsets that affect collaboration. The first is, do I have a mindset that I am separate from you? This is when the ego is the highest priority. And Thomas Hubel, who I understand was on Humanity Rising this week, talks about how these traumas start in childhood. Well, what happens as we're in a separate, I am separate from you mindset, is that I can see as I'm facilitating meetings that people step into many different postures. One of those postures is hunger. I want, this is mine, not yours. They take, they're never filled. Another stance or posture that people take on is envy. They are very involved in the politics of domination. They're one up and you down. If all of a sudden you're up and they're down, they're fighting to get themselves back up. And the third posture is the posture of shock, where self-protection at all costs. They're going to either hide or they'll come out aggressively to make sure that they are protected in no matter what happens. Well, that mindset of separation does not drive the kinds of results that we want. The mindset instead of interdependency, that you and I are one. We are part of a living system. We are conscious leaders, knowing that we are part of a living system. We are interdependent, that what I do affects what you do, and that what you do can amplify and support and strengthen what I do. These kinds of leaders have three postures as well that I'd like to speak about today. One is dialogue. They know that the answers are found in collective wisdom. They convene conversations across divisions and differences, and they make civic engagement intrinsically valuable to citizens. A second posture is one of searching, listening. These leaders who can operate from interdependency challenge the way they think and challenge the way others think about issues. They search for innovative possibilities. They listen and look for new collective patterns of understanding. And the third is a posture of sharing, looking for shared direction among multiple purposes and agendas, tapping people's gifts and talents, and generating a sense of community. So we already live in a vitally regenerative, verdant world. It's our choice whether we can support this world to return to enough stability to maintain this vital, regenerative, natural system that we are part of. It's a miracle that the earth exists. It's a miracle that we're here. And like the samurai, we can put aside what we think we know, who we think we are, to humbly listen, collectively engage in emergent wisdom with a commitment to vital, healthy life for the two-legged, four-legged, winged, finned, and all creatures on earth. We can make the choice to no longer repeat the past and instead to create a new future. Well, as I said at the beginning, the fastest lever for change is to identify what's working, find the best of conscious leadership, and amplify it. So I'd like to now turn this over to our speakers. Prashani, if you would be ready to come on first, and I would like to turn it over to you to speak. Please go right ahead. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for having me. Greetings to all of those listening in or watching us. As I said earlier, I'm from Johannesburg. I spend a lot of my time working throughout the African continent, and my other home is Accra in Ghana. I've been so mindful of some of the words we've been using in the introductory part of this conversation. And Karen, if I may go to your very initial process of getting us all to take a moment to pause and breathe. And I thought about that following that moment of breathing, where actually breath is that which is most rare because of this little virus. And what does it do to us when we start to appreciate breath as humanity? And earlier when you asked me about leadership, I said for me it's a conscious, lived learning process. And so I'm taking that note of that moment around precious breath being accessible, the fact that we can, those of us on this call, with the privilege of good health right now, the fact that we can actually fill our lungs with air and to exhale. And for me, the exhale moment that we're living in is not about the new ordinary. It's about the new extraordinary that we need to create. Because fundamentally to my work, to the spaces that I work in, is a life that the majority of the people who I engage with, who I work with, have difficulty in making everyday work every day. And so when we talk about the new normal, for me, it's not the new normal in the context of making the world work from those who have, but understanding how we create a space where the new extraordinary opens up space for others who don't currently have access. I spend my time working between the world of mainly the mining industry, but working in spaces with rural communities and understanding how we can actually change the reality of everyday possibility. So I saw in the chat earlier that somebody asked the question, what is truth? And I love that question because that's how I started my business 7 years ago. And I'm going to explain a little bit about my leadership and what I do through your question. So thank you for asking it. My business is called Sustainability Truthing. And the truthing in my logo is turned upside down, because the question to what is truth is a process of turning those assumptions we make on its head. And that's where I started with my business, because for so many years in my practice as an executive in mining companies and in senior roles in mining companies, I had tried to find space where people would allow me to work in the then focus that I had on climate change. And I constantly felt this. And no wonder I did, because I was talking about a paradigm that I understood. I was talking about a paradigm that meant something to me. And over a period of time, I learned to hear wisdom in those who the powers around me brought to me as mentors. And what they did was create space for me. And so sustainability truthing for me was about a place to hold space for myself and to hold space for others. That shift is part of this new extraordinary, is how do we hold space for each other in being able to design solutions that have meaning for everybody. And part of the work we do is actually through illustration, drawing what that meaning could look like, what that new truth could look like. Because many of us on this call can sit across screens from each other and talk about this new world. But how many people actually know what that looks like? How many people have experienced access to water, access to housing, access to electricity? So that when we talk about a shift to something different, their starting point is so far beyond where we are right now. The privilege of being able to sit together and actually communicate is something that most of the people on this planet don't have. So the first thing we do is create illustration with communities in very rural spaces, within mining communities and in traditionally held areas, to understand the possibility of what their land can produce, what their land can conserve, what their land can sustain. And through this process of illustration, we then create opportunities to match those opportunities with the impact investment world. How do we get the world to hear us? So mentors giving me room and holding space for me. One of the things that this mentorship process has done, and I say mentorship process in its largest possible way, because I managed to have the privilege of incredible leaders who allowed their voices to find places in my heart and my mind when I stopped resisting and stopped fighting. And so part of what we do is hold a leadership space within a engagement platform at the Vatican, within the dicastery for promoting integral human development. And I run something called the Laudato Si Action Group. As some of you may know, Pope Francis wrote a paper called Care for Our Common Home. And this paper is something that has given me extraordinary inspiration to understand the world that we're creating is firstly one that calls to all humanity, and that call to all humanity, no matter where we are, is what is driving me in my work. So when I say we go into rural areas, I'm also going into spaces that attract leaders who have the power to make decisions to change the quality of lives of people throughout the world. This little virus has changed our consciousness, but it's up to us to understand how we are able to hold that space for each other. Karen, this fact that you have us on this webinar this evening, and that we're all women, is a really important point for me to hold dear, because you've created space for us in a way that our voices, our hearts, our minds are shared in a very specific way. And I want to honor the fact that we all come to this conversation with mentors, like I mentioned, but also the wisdom and knowledge of our families, of the people in which we're working with. And in particular, I want to just spend some time talking about the context of the African continent and the word Ubuntu. Because the word Ubuntu, for those of you who haven't come across it before, talks about our shared humanity. And that knowledge and wisdom that is inherent on this continent is something that I hope and I pray we all are learning to get access to, but through the lens of those who've been left out, and predominantly that focuses on women. I spend my time on this continent because the work that we do can change the lives of so many people by focusing on the right level of change. And through these illustrations that I spoke about earlier, it's that work, that visioning, working, finding their own spaces within these illustrations that we use. I am mindful of there's a lot of conversation happening in the chat, and it's really encouraging being on this webinar and seeing this feedback from all of you. I will take some time following this few moments with you to answer some of your questions. But I ask you in my wrapping up that you constantly focus on what is possible. The fact that we are breathing is the one thing that humanity is trying to figure out how to sustain right now. How do you hold space for your breath? How do you hold space for others to actually move forward in changing their reality? The overwhelming negativity that you can hear every day around the quality of the challenges we face can surpass the fact that you have this privilege to breathe. And I ask you to just hold on to that one thing. Hold on to the wisdom that comes from your ancestors. Hold on to the wisdom that comes from the traditions in your own lands. hold on to the wisdom of what's possible in the spaces where you are working. Karen, I'm going to stop there if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Prashani. Thank you. Ah, the privilege to breathe. I will take that into my day. Oh, Kristen, let me invite you forward if I may.
Thank you.
So good to see you today.
Thank you. Oh, this was such a beautiful start, Karen, and yeah, I'm just feeling all filled up already with lots of good things and hope and inspiration. So you asked to share also some of the things that work with our work, and I began many years ago working with women, and I saw that what can we say, the patriarchy, the way of working and being of domination and control wasn't just a matter of women or men, because women have also been grown up in the same system, same cultures as men. And I realized that convening women, because with women we could create change in societies, in companies, in our own lives fast, if we also are sure that we woke up to see how we really can be and find our authentic truth. I started to convene and make big conferences of women. So my organization is called WIN. It stands for Women International Networking. And yet it's been about connecting to each other, to our leadership, and to so many ideas. One of the things that's been a burning work of mine is to put different people together, women from all over the world. So we meet from America, from Africa, from Europe, from China, from everywhere. And we meet also with different age groups and different nationalities and with different backgrounds and industries. And I always felt that doing that was a way for us to learn so much from each other. I see everywhere we come from, we have things we bring to the table, and these differences by meeting each other can just enrich. And just like the previous speaker talked about Ubuntu and how I can really only see myself in the mirror of another, and seeing people that are even more different from us expands ourselves. So it's not only being inclusive of another because of another, but it's because of ourselves. And then another part of our work is that of authenticity, of looking and stimulating and inspiring and supporting every one of us to find our own journeys. And that's so vital, just like we started with the breathe today, you know, who am I? And staying true to our own journeys and taking a stand for our own journeys and helping others find theirs, so that my ethics is a deep ethics to myself and to what I am a part of. And then the huge chunk of our work has been that of wholeness, and particularly, so if we look at the feminine and the masculine, the feminine is what has not been valued enough. We see it whether it's nature or whether it's women, or the feminine even within men. So although we need a balance, the majority of our work has been around how can I value beauty? How do I value putting arts into the workplace? How can I bring and make sure that intuition is really heard? How do we put value and a stand to all that traditionally wasn't valued, particularly in the workplace and in politics? And in some ways you can call it activism, although activism is an active word. So I saw that the most impactful is that of giving space, showcasing people, asking them to share from the values of the feminine. And also looking at creative processes. When we do the convenings, ask people to share what's the newest thing you're working on. What is it that makes you most passionate at the moment? Because also I have seen in my own life, I started with this vision of putting people together, but then I realized the vision has to become a way. It has to go from my mindset in some ways into how I walk, how I talk, how I make decisions, how I make my actions. And that makes it quite interesting, because we go from more of a horizontal way of planning and looking forward to actually a very vertical one, where being grounded, making a breath, and connected is then part of this beingness, and also of the feminine that we attract in balance with planning and making life in connection with goal setting and so on. So it's all about making our life unfold just as much as making it happen. And then also this focus on what is the emerging future, what are the possibilities emerging, and to train ourselves to look for what is open, what's opening. So train your brain to look away for problems, maybe sometimes also finding the solutions, but try to go where there is an empty space. So you can train yourself in the living room, go where there is no furniture, where there is a space. And I saw it was very important with women's issues. It's so easy to, in a way, talk about the unfair treatment, the harassment, the unequal pay, the unequal blah, blah, blah. But what is it that we really want? And to encourage each other, both women and men, to look for what world would I really want to live in? What workplace would I really like to be part of? How would that feel like? What would I need to be in that place? And have the courage to dream. Because I also seen so much that we have often, it's easy to talk about what doesn't work. So here is like to have get the freedom, takes that responsibility that we focus on this future that we maybe not really know what is, but we can smell it, we can feel it. And that's why the feminine of intuition is so important now in women and men, that we really listen to that, because it comes earlier to our skin, to our hunches, than it comes to our mental in many, many cases. So this is some of the things that I put in practice, and actually experimented with the WIN organization, not only in what we do, but how it has been done, in getting rid of titles like managers in the organization, but calling people participant relations, client relations, to focus that it's relationship with the external world and each other that's important. Doing evaluation forms that didn't anymore say, what do you think about this, but how did you feel about it also, so that it was a constant dance of the feminine and masculine in the structures and operational processes. And it works. So at least on most days, of course, there are many challenges, but I think this thing of, you mentioned commitment and being committed to something, and then take a stand for it and go for it. So yeah, I think that's enough right now.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. It's so good to see you again. I've attended and spoken at a number of Kristen's Women's International Network conferences that bring in women from all over the world. Well, I'd like to turn it over next to Ada, speaking with us today from London. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, Prashani, and Kristen. So I thought I would start by sharing a little of my own journey. So I have been one of those people, if you looked at my career, you would have thought that I jumped around and did lots of different things and couldn't quite see the connection between them. But what I realized is that I suppose that part of my life was very much about experimentation. And I think that that's how I see life, as a series of experiments. But what I was doing was actually fine-tuning my values and trying to bring them together, because recognizing that, and actually it's a mentor who helped me to realize it, that the values that I have, that I use for how I build personal relationships, is very similar in how I wanted to build professional relationships. And so actually getting to the point of being able to define and be very clear about what my values are. So I have 5 of them, and I have them, actually what I do now is I'm very clear, and I'm very open with what my values are. So the values are, the first one is trust. And that's about reciprocity without ego. And I think Karen, oh, you can't hear me properly. Hold on. Hopefully that's better. The first is trust, and that is about reciprocity without ego. And I think Karen mentioned ego as well previously, in that, you know, we have to check where our ego comes into things and help us make decisions. The second is curiosity, and that for me is about learning and growth through play. You know, a lot of us, you know, if we look at the education systems, especially I think sometimes in this country, we in the UK, we sometimes, you know, the established systems, you can think that play has been educated out of us, a lot of us. And so I'm really interested in how do we bring that curiosity back into us and back into everything that we do, because not just curious about the world that we live in, but curious about people and how we interact and our space with our place within all of that. I think Prashani mentioned activism. So activism for me is really about empathetic and compassionate evolution. So believing in something bigger than ourselves, but coming at it from a point of empathy and compassion. And it's through that that we start to change things. The next one is about diversity. And yes, we talk about diversity, but, you know, for me, we as humans would not exist without diversity. It's on a microscopic level, we would not exist without diversity, because, you know, the way that we are constructed, the way that everything is constructed, diversity is just a fact. The difference is that it's inclusion and behavior are choices. And so for me, diversity is about innovation through difference and collective intelligence, bringing those different voices together, those different wisdom, those different knowledges, because, you know, it's through that that we can find those beautiful spaces. I remember I was listening to a talk with Angela Davis, and she said something, it was actually something that somebody had said to her, but it stuck with me and it stayed with me for years. And it was about, rather than focusing on those trying to help people reach the glass ceiling, it's how do you help build trust and transparency and stability for those for whom the floor is constantly moving. And that really struck me. And that is how I really start to look at things. So those are my 5 values: trust, curiosity, activism, humility, and diversity. And what I do is I make sure that I bring them into everything that I'm doing. And very soon I realized that actually what I was doing is, I think it's actually when I started to really explore the Sustainable Development Goals and realized that the common thread in everything that I do, in my leadership, for want of a way of describing it, has really been around Sustainable Development Goal number 17. And that is, how do you create partnerships, that collaboration, curation, to address the other goals? So I see myself as in sometimes a leader is, for me, is about the curation, the idea of curation and helping to bring those stories together. And so where I've got to now is that I wear many hats. One of them is this idea of a tech futurist. And I find that quite an interesting perspective, because if we look at where we are now in terms of the coronavirus and the pandemic, the idea of futurism is, the way that a lot of people look at it, is predicting the future. Well, nobody can predict the future. But what I do is I take a philosophical and anthropological look at these things and ask ourselves questions, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell stories. And the way that we connect, when Karen was talking about collaboration, the way that that can happen is when we recognize ourselves in others and those stories. And so what I've been doing over the last couple of years is recognizing patterns in different worlds that help us to try and collaborate. So I've come up, I have recognized, rather than, because I don't believe that there's necessarily always a new idea. I think that all of these ideas are very much connected. It's the idea of Ouroboros, that everything is connected, and sometimes we just need to recognize those patterns. And so the framework now that I use is that I've created this, curated rather, this global movement that is about isms, questioning the isms that we have. And there are 5 phases to that. The first phase is about leave. How are we going to leave the old isms, those old structures, those old ideas behind? And that really starts with asking and defining our values, creating new values. Yes, the website is ism.earth. The second framework is, and so when you do that, when you start with phase one about leave, how do you leave those old structures behind? What you have to do then is come up with new values. And then what you do is you go into phase two, which is about breathe. And I know some of the previous speakers mentioned the word breathe. Breathing is about how do you take the tensions out of those systems? What are the things that have been holding those places, those areas in tension? And what you do at the end of that is you come up with a hypothesis for change. And this is almost this kind of idea of activism as well. It's what is, if we're going to dream big, there's nothing wrong with dreaming big, especially in this current climate, because what we once knew as normal is no longer there. And we don't know where we're going. So we have the opportunity to create new spaces. So the second one is breathe. The third one is grow. And this is where you really start to step outside of your bubbles and your echo chambers, the usual places that you go to find information. And you start to look at what are the tools, the technologies, the ideas, the wisdom, the knowledge, the voices that should be included as part of this discussion. Not at the end, not that we're designing just for other people, we're building something for these other communities, but not on the outside, but actually bring them in, bring those voices and knowledge in as part of the design process. And the fourth one is flow. How do you create a sense of flow? Well, flow is water. And what we're talking about is how do you turn these things into making them sustainable? How do you create that sense of organic nature within all of this? And then the final part is ground. How do you ground that all back down? And that's really about how do you start to create this idea of citizenship and kinship and scale this turn it into a movement. Because once you have that, you're bringing you're not bringing everybody. People are coming with you because they recognize themselves within that. And what you do is once you've done that, so the 5 phases are leave, breathe, grow, flow, and ground. And once you get to ground and you've got that, you're starting to scale this and build this movement and citizenship and kinship. You actually go back to phase 1 and look at it and say, now that we're doing this, does this still match our values? And so it becomes an iterative process of change and transformation and collaboration. And for me, that is how I very much embody my leadership and what I'm doing. And what, and I suppose on the work front, what's happening with that is that I'm actually now turning this into a global consultancy, which is where we bring other people into, I don't have to have all the answers. It would be impossible for one person to have all the answers. And so with that diminishing, dissolving of the ego, I recognize and accept and welcome those other voices to come into this. And it's not about whether it's masculine or feminine, it's just recognizing that there are other ways of knowing, other knowledge, other tools and technologies that can help us to achieve that. And I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Ada. And Alyssa, let me turn it over to you. I really am glad that you're here with us today. Thank you for joining us, especially at such a late time of the night.
Thank you, Karen. Really inspiring sharing and wisdom so far, keeping me very energized at this time of night. To share a little bit of my story, from a young age, my dream was really to explore the world and get a better understanding of different parts of the world. And I think that was the seed for that, was that I grew up in 2 different countries, really back and forth between the 2. I was living in Miami and also in Greece. And in that, growing up, there was an interesting phenomenon of belonging to both, and also in a sense not belonging anywhere, because in the one place you in terms of social identity belong to the other place. And I think much later I realized that that experience of what was important and identity in terms of national identity being such an important definition for who we are in this era of the world we live in, created a sense or a need or a realization that what was most important finally for me, and this was around the time I was finishing high school or early in university, was the primary sense of identity was that of being a human being. And the most important connection or sense of identity was that. And so that led me to really want to get to know as much as possible all the aspects of what that meant, and living across the world in many different countries, including in Asia, where I've been for the last 14 years. Scientists have identified a gene called the 7R, which is, for short, they call it the 7R, and it's most common in migratory cultures, and currently still found in 20% of the population. People who have it embrace exploring new places, embracing movements, change, and adventure. So I'm pretty sure I have that, and fortunate to have a husband who has it. And whether our two boys who have grown up in Asia have it or not remains to be seen. But for the moment, we're all moving around less. And I also have to say that's probably a good thing. So when you asked us, Karen, what is conscious leadership? I've been struggling with this question the last few months. I think it's a heavy time for conscious leaders. I think it's a heavy time for leaders in general. And looking beyond the stock market, which seems to be doing kind of okay, I think there's a big weight of what's going on right now. And many of us, we feel the responsibility for our teams, for our businesses, for our clients. And then beyond that, a sense of responsibility for the most vulnerable people who are suffering the most. So due to our collective poor management up until now, when we look at the situation with the pandemic, we see immediately that I think the latest figure is 30 million people will go back into extreme poverty in this period as a result of some of the challenges. And so I think that creates a lot of heaviness. And it's extremely important at this time that we re-energize, boost, and burn bright, as I said in the beginning, because that energy is something that, especially for the many enlightened leaders, and I say many, they could be from 10-year-olds up until 80 and 90-year-olds, all the spectrum. All of these leaders in the world need to remain very hopeful in the period that's coming up for us, the challenges that are coming up. And we've talked a lot, we've said the word paradox a lot. So most recently, one of the research pieces we wrote in Asia as the pandemic broke out was called The World versus COVID, actually set in a tennis match, not a war, a tennis match, and saying that the world has lost the first set. And the head of APAC research for CCL and I interviewed many CEOs in the region to come up with this piece of research, which is available. And we identified a number of paradoxes that leaders are grappling with. They've been grappling with these paradoxes already, but they're amplified. And so one that's coming up for me as we talk about all of this is display empathy and tough love. And I feel that as leaders, and this is what female leaders especially bring, which is very important. We've seen this in the nations that are led by women in the world through COVID and in general. We bring the empathy, and it's very, very much needed to step into people's shoes at this time. Step into the shoes of the most vulnerable people, of children, understanding the experience, the fear that's created by all this. At the same time, the tough love comes in that we really need to push ourselves and push people toward change, which you talked about in the beginning, Karen. And when we're too comfortable, it's difficult to change. And so I think the opportunity here is to really, while we display that empathy, at the same time display the tough love of waking up in the morning and saying, as Brene Brown says, courage over comfort, pushing ourselves to have the discipline to do systematically, do things, change behaviors that needs to be changed. And so this is one of the paradoxes that I think is very amplified, and for leaders to help their people. For example, while we want to provide a sense of security to all our employees in a period like this, at the same time, I think the mindset of change is so important for people to be willing and open to change. Ultimately, I think what's very important in leadership right now, if the purpose, if our overall purpose is the well-being of humanity, and numerous people in the chat, we have many people talking about the United Nations Development Goals. The goals are clear. And I think it's clear that as a whole, that's about the well-being of humanity. We talked about donut economics. So if that's the goal, everything needs to be in service of that. And I think that fundamentally we live with a limiting belief that basic well-being for 7 billion people is difficult or impossible to achieve, because we haven't seen that happen so far, because history tells us that we need to have wars, we need to fight, because we've been trying with the United Nations Development Goals, progress hasn't been as significant as we'd like. So first of all, I think as leaders, as enlightened leaders, as conscious leaders, we have to believe this is possible. And with the amount of overall technological development, the amount of wisdom that's already on the planet, I believe it's very, very possible. So how do we really rally around that? And what's risky right now is that it's a discouraging time for leaders. Many leaders have worked very hard on products, projects, hunger alleviation, to see many of their efforts fall apart or get set back. So we need to help leaders, including ourselves, face failure. I think that's important work right now. Leaders tend to be ambitious and achievement-oriented people. And in the last 20 years, the world has been in a fairly prosperous period. So facing failure isn't something that all leaders are necessarily used to. In our work, just as an example, one of the projects we've had for the last few years has been a partnership with the Habitat for Humanity, where we've had a youth leadership program in the Southeast Asia region. In the last 3 years, the program has touched 14,000 lives. So in countries including the Philippines and Nepal, India, we have delivered this youth leadership program to a number of young people who normally wouldn't have access to this kind of self-awareness, this kind of training. And I remember going over in November to Negros Occidental in the Philippines, where in a coalition, we were breaking ground for building 10,000 new houses in a seismic-proof houses with Habitat, and supporting those communities to develop in healthy ways. And really just so touching to see what a difference this kind of community building can make in these places with very little access to the type of resources, the type of self-awareness, this type of information. And of course, right now, these kind of projects are set back significantly. It's difficult to continue that kind of building. And it's also difficult to do the face-to-face delivery of these kind of youth leadership programs. So we're now working on, as we've done with all of our private sector clients, moving those into online formats, just like this with Zoom. However, what you quickly realize is that just in Asia alone, although 2.3 billion people have access to the internet, 2 billion people still do not. So there's the digital divide, and I think an opportunity to close some of that in all of this. But these kind of setbacks, certainly for leaders, can be disheartening. So I think a pragmatic optimism is needed, where we don't sugarcoat stuff, where we need to show that we're real human beings to our teams, that we are discouraged by all of this. And that we are working through it ourselves. I think authenticity and transparency is big. The people can see through just a sugar coating or trying to pretend everything is okay all the time. It's not. And so I think leaders are facing failure in big ways. I believe, we're going to see, we're already seeing many large organizations potentially go bankrupt coming up here. And this opens up the opportunity for more humility, for transparency, for leaders facing failure, and rising above it. And I believe rising above it will mean a new definition of success. At this stage in our evolution, we should be able to create a world that provides basic well-being for everyone. And so I think that we have an opportunity for that new definition of success to emerge through all of this. I'll stop there, Karen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alyssa. The extent of the work that you're doing across Asia. I know there's so much more that we could gain from each of you. Let me ask all of the panelists now, if you would, to turn your video on and join Alyssa and I here. Let's open this, Rick, if we could, with the technology so that we can see all of us on the screen at once. And we'll open it into a little bit more of a discussion time. Specifically, what I'm interested in is to think about, there was so much here. There was so much that I could go back to. But where my attention is on the question of wisdom. Because whether we're working with the marginalized people that don't have the services, whether we're convening women, whether we are confronting the limits of cyborg shamanism, or whether we are working in Asia, each of you are working in, Prashani, you're working in the Vatican, you're working in the mining industry. I mean, we are talking substantive work that each of you are doing. And the question I have at this point is how do you, what are your personal practice? What might be one of your personal practices? But also, how do you set the context from which wisdom emerges? And Alyssa, it appears that you're still spotlighted on this video here. So I don't know, maybe that's just on my video here. Oh, there we go. Nope, we're good. So who would like to start? I'm asking who's got the, what are your thoughts about how you cultivate wisdom, that kind of multifaceted, broader intelligence that we're alluding to today? And how do you do so in yourself and in others? Who would like to start? I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Ada, please.
I will. Thank you. Great question. So I think in my own practice, I start by recognizing that wisdom can come from anywhere. It's not purely exclusive to me or people who have my own background or educational system or, what have you. That wisdom can come from anywhere. I mean, a lot of the work that I'm starting to do, or the work that I have emerged into, the spaces that I have emerged into, looks at the anatomy of transformation and ancient wisdom, and recognizing that there are things that came before us and there are things that will come after us. And what I do is I try to connect the dots. So, for example, I'll give you an example. If we are, with my tech hat on, the idea of blockchain, these decentralized systems, that actually, if we look back through history, we recognize that there were ancient Mexican civilizations who used decentralized systems to irrigate their land. And so, but we also recognize that same decentralized system that is how starfish are. It's, in Africa, it's how children are named and legacies and heritage is passed down. And so wisdom, it's about what I do is I am very deliberate in trying to understand and see where I can recognize those patterns to get a deeper understanding of what that wisdom means and the potential of that wisdom. So with, looking at, if I wear the futurist hat for a moment and I look at the idea of 360 videos or virtual reality, what I'm actually looking at is what's the intentionality of that. What is the intention of what it's trying to do? It's trying to create a multi-sensory, immersive experience around us. And so the technology, the tool, the VR, it's just a tool. But that knowledge and that wisdom of how do we then create this experience that is multi-sensory around us is how I start to try and understand where those pockets of wisdom can come from, and the fact that it's not just my views.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. Love it.
Everything thrown in there.
We have a whole nother conversation that can come out of this. I love it. Who else? Let's. There's so much here. There's so much richness. Prashani, are you ready to go? You look like it.
Sure, I am. The first thing that came to mind when you asked the question was, I think what's worked for me the most, and this is after years and years of trying to share my view, was letting go of the positions that I was bringing into spaces. So the first answer is letting go, and then opening up to how other people see me and my strengths. And it's taken me a very long time to really appreciate how others see me in their environment, how they see my my difference. So there was I for so many years in my personal and professional practice, pushing the system and trying to find space and wanting voice, when actually there was this world of appreciation already that I wasn't listening to. And so being able to navigate transformation is something that I never framed as my professional practice, but it's where, when I let go of the fighting, people come to me. And as a result, because that energy is open, and then I go back to the holding space for others, I then naturally am in a space where we're holding each other. So I just have to say, I find the word wisdom one that I'm learning to use in my own context. It's not something that, certainly in my culture, that I would assign to myself. It's something that comes later or is in the ether. So yeah, I'm answering your question and honoring it, but also struggling with it.
Please do, because I think that wisdom has been put as something abstract or only in connection with something transcendent, and practical wisdom. And we all know the difference in our lives between when we make a choice that's a wise choice and when we make a choice that is not such a wise choice. And we may not know it in the moment, but we can see the results as we go along. I ask the question because it seems to me that one of the things the world really lacks at this point, and that I lack when I get triggered, when I get into separation, when I get into self-protection, is a wiser, broader perspective. And I find that people are wise if we but ask. When I speak on wisdom and I say, how many of you can describe a time in your life when you were wise? The room comes alive with people talking to each other about the time when they considered themselves wise, when they felt wise. When I ask companies, how many of you have wisdom on your performance reviews? The room goes dead, because absolutely nobody has considered it. And yet it's what we're looking for in leaders. It's what we're looking for in each other. Who would like to join the chat next? We have a few more minutes here. Alyssa or Kristen?
Yeah, happy to share. So I was thinking the other day, actually, for my own organization, I was sharing with some friends that, I think we need to create a board, or not exactly a board, more something like wisdom keepers, of the legacy of the almost 25 years of working with women, because so many have been overcoming seemingly impossible jobs and made it possible. And so many have gone through struggles, but because of these struggles, possibilities came their way. And it was just a sort of a sense of that wisdom is something that goes before we came here and continues forward. So yes, there is new technology. Yes, there is things, but there's certain values that and experiences that goes into these words that is so important. And I also noticed when I travel the world, I mean, I've gone to the Abuja in Nigeria or in Japan or in the Middle East or wherever I've been. And I realized that connecting with people, if I connect to their wisdom, just like you say, Karen, asking those questions, what's your wisdom? You know, or connecting with traditions, musical matters, things that have been around for a while. And suddenly you realize that, there's something common there. And immediately I have this sisterhood or this humanhood that's happening. It's very, very powerful that we do that, because I think that glues us or binds us together. And you also asked, so what are you doing yourself to assure you keep your wisdom? And I had to think about that. And I was thinking, yeah, I mean, I haven't been home in a while because it's not so easy to travel. And I come from Norway. And I realized how important it is actually for me to go back to my own land sometimes, to stand on the soil on the earth of where I was born, and to, you know, there's something about the stones, the rocks, the all of those things that made me also connect to something that I feel familiar with. But then as I travel too, what can I connect with other than that? So I think it's important to have, I have meditation practices, make sure I go for walks, and also now during COVID, been intensifying that, doing more meditation. And here where I live, I've always been able to go for walks, but the distancing has been very important. But that has really helped me. So it's been in some way also a wonderful time to actually deepen those practices and being very present. So I think, Karen, this is a question to be brought more into business, into organizational life, because it's something that makes us think in a more broader and deeper way. And it unites people. So thank you for bringing this up.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you do have so much wisdom that you've been gathering on those stages for all those years and all those conversations that you have convened, and some way to weave that, so the substance of that together. It's an exciting, very exciting project. Alyssa, would you like to weigh in on this?
I think yeah, I'm going to build on what Kristen is saying, that in organizational life, I mean, to me, wise choices are choices that put humanity first at this point, where people have the opportunity to become who they want to be. And certainly not where half the people are left behind with no choices. So, you know, if that is wisdom, then how do we cultivate more of that? And in terms of practices, another one of the paradoxes that we wrote about was slow down to go fast. So in any crisis, in any emergency, the adrenaline kicks in. Businesses need to move fast to compete right now. The competitive landscape is getting more aggressive, more difficult. That's the reality. That's the pragmatism here. And at the same time, I think the enlightened leaders, the visionary leaders, will continuously pause, even though they will be in sprints to go fast. And whether it's saving their businesses or shaping or pivoting their businesses, they'll also be pausing for wisdom. And how you do that, and for me, it also includes meditation practices, exercise. I think that's so important for us to be able in this period, although we need to adapt quickly to everything that's going on, to be able to pause and reconnect to what those wise choices are and what's really important and what the purpose of all of this is. Because I think it's very, very easy to just get lost in it all, lost in the noise, lost in the chaotic nature, and end up with some result that doesn't really mean anything in the end. So pausing for wisdom would probably be whatever behaviors that we can each do that creates that reconnection for us is I think what's needed for accessing wisdom.
Can I add to that point? Thank you. That was beautiful. You just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes, which is music. It's apparently by Claude Debussy. And the quote is, "Music is the silence between the notes." Mm. And, you know, if I think about this time, you know, that we find ourselves in, that pre-coronavirus, we were, you know, in two minds. We were either focusing on the past, being nostalgic, you know, and we see that rhetoric and those voices in Make America Great and blah, 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 and all of that. Or we were focusing on the future and trying to careen forward and focusing on how can we get to there, and distracting ourselves with all these other things all around. And actually the coronavirus and the pandemic has made us stop. Mm-hmm. And that's actually it's still quite a privileged response for many of us around the world, but it's made us stop and be in this liminal space where we can't go, we know that the normal that we had before doesn't exist anymore. We don't know what's coming. And so the wisdom now is to be in these silences and recognize that there is power within that space and that we can make choices. I think all of us have spoken about the ability to make choices, to make choices about how we come together to create the futures that we want.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. How do we come together to create the future that we want? That is the question. That is a question right there. How do we come together to create the future that we want? How do we come together internally so that we're together? You know, we're not spread out. We're not challenged in all those ways. And how do we come together through our hearts and our minds, through what matters the most to us, through how much we care for a world that isn't working for everybody?
Well, the question that I tend to ask when I do talks is I tend to finish with a question: what kind of ancestors do we want to be?
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. What kind of ancestors do we want to be? Well, that brings me to the question of commitment, because to me, at the core of what we wake up each day, what a leader anyone who's leading, whether it's at the smallest neighborhood level or the largest global level, they lead from a core commitment, something that they have in front of them that matters to them, and that motivates them to get up in the morning, to put their feet on the floor and to step into whatever is theirs to step into, hard or easy, complex or simple. So I would like to ask each of the panelists and each of you who are attending with us, if you would take just a minute, a little pause again for silence. I love that, pausing for wisdom. A pause for wisdom, a pause to consider at this moment, what is your commitment that you are taking forward? It could be small and it could be large. What is your commitment that you are taking forward from this session today? It might be the same you've had, it might be something different. So let's pause for wisdom. I invite each of you that are attending with us to take a pause as well, and then to begin to put your commitments into the chat. And I'll ask each of the panelists to share theirs. So Prashani, would you be willing to start?
Certainly. With deep gratitude to you, Karen, for the invitation and for the heart that's been shared amongst the speakers and also the people on the chat. I feel what I need to take from this and commit to is to finding more spaces for my voice, coming from a place in the world with very little voice, in the relative sense of the scope of our challenge. So finding space for my voice and owning a little bit of that nudge that you gave me in terms of wisdom. Okay, it wasn't a little nudge. And I'm owning the nudge you've given me and moving forward in terms of finding space for my voice.
I hear your commitment. Thank you. And Kristen?
Yeah. So so grateful for this question and for being here with all of you. And so on the one hand, I'm committed to what I've been committed to for a long time. And I am in this moment feeling that I'm committed to continuously creating openings, possibilities, and bringing people together for hope. Yes.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. I'm going to take a minute and read a few of them that are in the chat because I'm getting all inspired over here. And then I'll go back to our panelists. Oh my goodness. I commit to help humanity reclaim its divinity so that we may become divine ancestors. I commit to continue my self-development and continue volunteering in my community. Deep gratitude that I can breathe and be each day. I commit to following up with the links and offers of people that are on today and to immersing myself more deeply in my study of how global consciousness shifts. I commit to connecting with people locally to continue these conversations and share the wisdom I have gathered from all of these webinars. I continue to lighting a flame and then keeping it burning. I commit to experience the blessings each moment while supporting the Conscious Connectors Coalition. Whew, the commitments are pouring in. I commit to hearing the movements of the one we are and showing ourselves to ourselves. I commit to walking what I call the path of the bridger. Oh, you're taking my breath away with the power and potency of these commitments. It's quite beautiful. Kristen, let me turn it over to you, if I may, so that you can close with your commitment. Yes.
Yeah, I think, so it was my commitment is this opening and inspiration.
Oh, we heard from you. I'm so sorry. It was Ada who's next. I got so kerflunked listening, watching to everybody's commitments here.
Commitments. It's so amazing. Yeah.
My commitment, as much like Kristen, is to continue what I'm doing, but actually being inspired by this session and the voices and the words that are appearing, and actually the energy that I'm feeling as a result of this beautiful conversation. I'm feeling very grounded. So my commitment is to remember to breathe, to listen, to see, and then to amplify.
Thank you, Ada. And Alyssa.
My commitment, Karen, is to continue to work for positive change without being attached to the result. And I have to admit that that's difficult for me. I like to see the result. I like to see that fairness, the freedom, the change. And I think for many of us now, it's about continuing to have the hope, the pragmatic optimism, the belief that we work for the positive change. And even if we can't see the immediate result, it all is adding up in consciousness over time for the longer term, for the long view. So keeping up that energy, shining the bright light to work for the positive change without being attached to the result is my commitment.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. You wake us all up to looking deeper at if we did let go of our attachments, if we did let go of our expectations, what are we then willing to be committed to? What's beyond our comfort zone? And what stands at the core of what we wake up each morning to be? I'm going to read a couple more from the chat. That we wake up each morning to be the best person I can be, lifting my conscience, respecting our planet and nature, being loving to myself and everybody. commit to keeping the vision. I commit to following the calling of my soul. I commit to remembering that every adult, despite their actions, is carrying an inner child, always desiring to love and be loved. Oh, goodness, this is so impressive and exciting, all of the different commitments that you all stand in. Well, my commitment continues to be to look for and celebrate the wisdom in each of you and to help link that to your leadership so that you show up every morning willing and able to take action on that which matters the most to you, to have things happen in the world that have never happened before because of who you are and how you show up in the world. So thank you all for speaking today, Alyssa, Kristen, Ada, and Prashani. And thank you to Jim and Humanity Rising for giving us this platform, this opportunity for us to come together, to get to know each other, and this wonderful group of participants who have been so powerfully present today. So thank you, Jim. I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. What a wonderful, beautiful panel. And it reminds me of the thought experiment that I went through sometime in the beginning of the pandemic when I was trying to think through, how do you really change stuff in a significant, systematic way? And so I thought, if I was dictator for a day and I could make one decision, what would it be? And I immediately thought, well, I would stop any further oil drilling. And then I thought, well, that's not solving anything. That's just stopping prices, but it's not actually anything really transformational because the system stays in place. And then I thought maybe, stop the deforestation of the Amazon. And I came to the same conclusion. And I thought, what would be as systemically transformational as the pandemic? And the only solution I could come up with is immediately in the next 30 days, turn over all governmental and organizational leadership in the world over to women for the next 10 years. And I realized that was actually a really good idea. And every time we have a panel, Aaron, that's all women, I have to say, after 72 sessions, that women in dialogue with each other have a certain quality of, I would say, discourse, empathy, and I would say wisdom that is distinct. The panels with all men are very, very different. And the panels with men and women are different, but tend to orient toward the male way of interacting, just because of the force of 6,000 years of patriarchy. You guys all know out there that the 7 countries that are doing the best with COVID are all run by women. The 7 countries that are doing the worst, including the United States and Brazil, India, China, Russia, etc., are all run by men. And so it's worth just noting this. And I say this not as an interesting idea. It seems to me that it's a national security issue. And secondly, I would say we just saw how quickly the world changed with the pandemic. We shut ourselves down. If you'd have said that the world economy was going to shut down 30 days before the pandemic, you would have been judged crazy. And we did it. So we've demonstrated to ourselves that radical change in a very short period of time is actually possible. And after this panel, I would repeat my inspiration that if I was dictator for a day, I would turn world power over to women for the next 10 years. And think about that. If we had women in leadership for the next 10 years, what great ancestors we would be. We would have really seized the moment and given to those who actually know the right to exercise power at a moment when the world is in a critical, traumatized, unbalanced positioning at the edge of a precipice. So I really want to thank all of you for everything you've contributed today. And Karen, I'm looking forward to your next session. And just so you can see a little bit about what's coming, on the 6th of August and on the 9th of August, we're going to be commemorating the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and then on the 9th of Nagasaki. And the panels are being convened by Cynthia Lazaroff, and they're all women. And I think that is a symbolic way of also emphasizing the leadership that women need to employ. One thing that I would add here that is important about leadership is the way you have characterized it. In many ways, what you have been talking about are what are commonly called soft skills. If you think of the way you have described leadership, it's been around emotional intelligence, it's been around empathy, it's been around collaboration. That was one of the things, Karen, you opened with. These are all soft skills. And literally every study in the world around soft skills in the last 10, 15 years have been saying that soft skills are now critical skills. We don't need more left brain leadership. We need right brain, soft skill leadership. And for those of you, by the way, who would like to take some courses on soft skills, Ubiquity University emphasizes soft skills. If you look at our curriculum, we believe that young people and learners of all ages need to learn a more feminine way of being in the world. It's called soft skills, but it is the kinds of skills that all of us need, both to navigate hypercomplexity, to develop life competencies that can contribute to a meaningful life, to get jobs, to get promoted. And so what these women have been talking about today, again, is not academic. It's actually essential for the survival of the human race. And so that we can become, I forget who said it, the ancestors, our children's 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 down to the 7th generation deserve. So thank you all. Tomorrow, we're going to go one step deeper, and that is we're convening a panel of Indigenous elders from around the world. Because I think the wisdom now of the Indigenous, like the wisdom of women, is critical wisdom. So tomorrow, same time, same station, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time, here on the Zoom line or on our Facebook page or YouTube channel, we'll be garnering the Indigenous wisdom of the world. So thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye. Splendid panel. Loved it.